On Boxing Day 1920, 53,000 people crammed inside Goodison Park, while thousands more were turned away. But it wasn't for an Everton League match. They had only attracted 35,000 in their 4-2 defeat to Arsenal the previous day. Instead, crowds had gathered for a charity women's game between Dick Kerr Ladies of Preston and St Helens. The game set a record for attendance at a women's football match, but bizarrely, it would be over a century until such a crowd would be seen again. Women's football in one form or another seems to have existed as far back as the men's game. Poetry as far back as 1580 references women's versions of the informal matches that were played between entire towns or cities. In terms of a game played under the laws drawn up by the Football Association in 1863, the first sure reference is of an international game between England and Scotland played at Easter Road in Edinburgh in 1881. Scotland won 3-0, although there are question marks over whether the teams on display were the best their respective nations had to offer, and press coverage seemed more concerned by what the players wore and a supposed lack of quality and understanding of the game. The next time women's football attracted significant attention was in 1894, when a series of notices were placed in newspapers and periodicals calling for women to sign up for the British Ladies Football Club. The secretary's name was Nettie Honeyball, a masterful publicist who soon gained celebrity. She even secured patronage from Lady Florence Dixie, the author of the feminist novel Gloriana, which imagined a future in which women had the right to vote. Honeyball, though, was not her real name, and there remains uncertainty as to who she actually was. The likeliest candidate is Mary Hudson of Crouch End. She was not the only player who seemingly gave a false name, suggesting female players feared social consequences if they became known as footballers. Applicants for the club were told to apply to a Miss P at an address that belonged to a family called Smith. Miss P was presumably Phoebe Smith, whose two brothers seem to have also been involved in running the side. The British ladies were coached by the Tottenham centre-half Bill Julian and drew 10,000 fans for a game they arranged between North and South London. Again, the media coverage was broadly dismissive though, and the team disbanded in 1895 as Honeyball disappeared and Lady Florence Dixie withdrew her support. 2 decades later though, social conditions had changed. As the First World War raged, the male workforce was redirected into the military and women were drafted into industrial employment. The Dick Kerr factory in Preston, which was converted for munitions production, ran a men's team. After a run of poor results, workforce banter led to a game against a team of women employed by the factory who enjoyed it so much that they kept on playing. When a local hospital approached them to help with a fundraiser for the wounded soldiers, rather than putting on a concert, the women arranged a football match against the neighbouring Arundel Coulthard foundry. Although Dick Kerr Ladies became the most famous women's team of the age, a lot of workplaces founded teams. There Lay Ladies of Nottingham and Bennetts of London were based on large industrial firms. Huddersfield Atlanta were made up of secretaries and teachers, while in London, lots of Lions, who were a famous chain of tea shops, had their own teams. After the war, as men returned from the front, rather than diminishing in popularity, crowds swelled further, reaching their peak in that match at Goodison Park on Boxing Day in 1920. By the end of 1921, there are an estimated 150 women's teams in England, 25 of whom banded together to found the short-lived Women's Football Association. Dick Kerr were by far the most celebrated, playing 30 matches in 1920. Their great star was Lily Parr, a tall left-winger who spent 3 decades at the side and scored over 1,000 goals. But women's football was never entirely accepted. Many seemingly felt that what might have been acceptable during the upheaval of wartime was somehow unbecoming in peacetime. In addition, there were concerns about whether women were amateur footballers like they claimed or paid professionals. This may seem strange to think now, but at the time there were fierce disputes over the definitions of amateurism that saw the 4 UK nations withdraw from FIFA. In summer 1921, the FA gave Dick Kerr Ladies permission to play a charity game against the south of England in Bristol, but insisted on full accounting, an indication of their concern over where the money was going. A number of other games were subject to similar scrutiny. Then, in December 1921, the FA banned women's football from facilities of affiliated clubs on the grounds that the game of football was quite unsuitable for females and ought not to be encouraged, and concerned about the appropriation of receipts to other than charitable objects. The precise motivation remains unclear, although it's obvious that many on the FA committee felt women playing football was somehow unseemly or inappropriate. There was also concern that the women's game might draw crowds away from men's football amid a slump in general attendances in tough economic conditions, particularly as the league launched 2 further divisions. An obvious solution would have been to have a professional women's league based around the existing clubs to generate an additional revenue when the men's team played away, but it seems this was never seriously considered. The women's game did not disappear entirely after 1921 though, but official sanction reduced its legitimacy and created obvious problems in finding spaces to play. The Dick Kerr Ladies used rugby pitches and local recreation grounds, and even went on a tour of the USA in 1922. Parr and 7 other members of the side no longer needed at the factory found work at the Whittingham Hospital to make ends meet while playing. A Women's FA Cup final was played in 1922 at Cobridge in Stoke-on-Trent, but as the ban did its work, the next Women's FA Cup final wasn't played until 1971, and it wouldn't be until October 2023, when Liverpool women beat Arsenal women at the Emirates Stadium, that an English club game drew more fans than Dick Kerr ladies had on Boxing Day in 1920.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League football story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football.